believed Dad cut contact with his parents because of family drama, but years later Grandma sent me a letter explaining Dad stole all of her retirement money and lied to everyone by claiming she was abusive so he could escape responsibility. I'm 34F, living in Boston right now, but grew up in a little Indiana town with my older brother, Mark, 38M, and our parents, Dad, 62M now, and Mom, 59F. My childhood was fine, but nothing exceptional, and basically, much of how I understand our family is founded on the stories Dad told us about why he cut himself off from his parents when I was growing up. I must have been 8 or 9 when I first realized that in contrast to most of the kids at school, I really didn't have grandparents who came to the recitals, the birthday parties, the holidays. Certainly Mom's parents came, but Dad's side was just this huge void. Whenever I asked him, Dad would just shake his head, sigh, and say something vague like, "Some people don't know how to love right, and you're better off without them." At the time, that was enough to stick. I mean, I did trust him. He was my dad, the one who showed me how to ride a bike, who took me to the county fair and won for me this huge stuffed bear when I was 10, who let me stay up late working on a science project when I remembered it the night before it was due. He wasn't perfect. No one's dad is. But I believed he was a good man. The family legend that we grew up on was that Grandma was this heartless, manipulative woman who made Dad's childhood a living hell. He said she controlled everyone, that she just kept people around for the money, that she was heartless. He never got into the kind of explicit, graphic details you'd hear when somebody says, abuse, and tells it, but he didn't need to. The way he'd talk, the way his face would twist, was enough to have Mark and me thinking she was harmful, someone we didn't need. He told us once, when fighting with Mom, that grandmother used to whip him with whatever she could find, spoons, belts, shoes, and that she'd humiliate him in front of people. I remember I was around 12 and had this weird bubbling rage for this woman whom I didn't even know. Why would a grandmother be such an entity? How could anyone be so cruel to their own child like that? Mom never discussed it. Every time Grandma came up, she just pursed her lips and looked at Dad with this mix of support and sympathy. Like she was quietly believing his story but didn't want to add anything. Mark and I never probed. We didn't even try. We spent our whole childhood reciting that story. Dad's mom was toxic. Dad had escaped, and we were lucky he protected us from her. It wasn't until I was an older child, like when I reached high school, that I started noticing the holes. For one thing, Dad's sister, Aunt Lisa, who we never saw, didn't act like someone raised by a monster. She was married, had kids, seemed normal. The only occasional time she appeared, she'd say things like, "Mom inquires about you guys all the time," and Dad would snap back that his mother had lost her right to learn anything about us. Lisa would drop the matter, but I always felt that there was more to what was going on. I should have questioned things. But as a teenager, you don't want to cause drama that would come back on you. By this point, Dad was already strict about other stuff. Grades, who I dated, whether or not I went to parties. He could turn from fun to frightening in an instant. Like when Mark was an hour past curfew and came storming in, and Dad grounded him for a month and broke his phone in half in the driveway. Stuff like that made it clear. You didn't play around with him, so we didn't. We just played the "Grandma was abusive" card and left it there. And as time went on, Dad excluded Lisa as well, said she was a liar, that she was siding with the enemy. I remember Mom having a breakdown one time and saying, "It's your sister, you can't just act like she doesn't exist." But Dad was stone cold, said, "Anyone who wants to keep her a part of my life is against me." And that was that. Family drama was the background of our lives, such as this invisible wall that we never traversed. By the time I was in college, Dad's parents were apparitions. No picture in the house, no tales except for the negative ones. No discussion of their birthdays and holidays. They could have been deceased. I never second-guessed it. Not really. Because when you're young, you think what your parents say is true. I just had this idea in my mind, that my grandmother was this terrible person I didn't have to deal with. And yet, at the same time, I always had this persistent feeling of curiosity. Like on Grandparents' Day at school, when all the other kids had theirs there with cupcakes and hugs. And I'd just be sitting there with Mom trying to smile. I'd think, who is this woman really? Is she really so bad? But then I'd remember Dad's face whenever she was mentioned, the way his jaw locked like he was holding back rage, and I'd shove the thought away. For so long, that was the reality I lived. Grandma was abusive, Dad was the survivor, and we were the children who had been saved from her toxin. If only I'd had any idea how untrue that actually was. The letter arrived out of the blue, and to be honest, if I hadn't recognized the trembling handwriting on the envelope, I might have discarded it without opening it. I was at home over a weekend, sitting at Mom's kitchen table, going through a stack of old letters she'd shoved into a drawer, when I stumbled on it. My name, written in blue ink, a little messy like the hand of the writer wasn't steady anymore. It was from a small town in Ohio that I didn't even know existed. For an instant, I believed it to be garbage or some odd con, but something inside my stomach urged me to tear it open. The opening sentence nearly dropped it. Dear Emily, I am your grandmother. I know you were told awful things about me, and I don't know if you will ever believe me, but before I die I want you to know the truth. My heart tightened up reading it. I would have bet my life I heard the voice of Dad in my head saying, "Don't trust her, she's manipulative." But there it was in black and white, a letter from the woman I had disliked and feared my whole life. I came close to not reading it. I sat there staring at the page, shaking hands, for if I read it and she was lying, then it was another way of playing games with me. But if she wasn't, then everything I thought about my family would dissolve. I don't know what kept me going, maybe only the knowledge that she seemed so tired, as if she had little time left. She described her own life, that she'd worked as a nurse for 30 years, saved every penny possible, and when she retired had enough set aside to live simply but well. She described Dad approaching her when he was 30-odd, when Mark had just been born, and begged her for help with an investment that would change everything. He promised her he'd repay her in 2 years, that he was trustworthy, that it was for his family. She gave him her retirement savings, all of it. She said she conflicted but that he cried, said she was the only one who ever believed in him, and she wanted to believe her son had finally straightened his life out. Except he never repaid her. He never spent a penny of it. She indicated he used the money to pay off debt, a new car, and the down payment on a bigger house. When she questioned him, he exploded. She indicated that he shouted at her that she wasn't grateful, that he was her son and she owed it to him. And when she confronted him, he cut her out altogether. He told them all, her brothers, her friends, us, that she was abusive and manipulative, so no one would believe her if she ever made a statement. I sat there clutching my book, my chest pounding, feeling like the ground under me had just given way. Because it sounded nuts, right? My dad stealing from his mother, making up abuse to cover himself? And then she said something that froze my blood to the point. Emily, I know he told you that I was abusive. I want you to think, did he ever share with you details? Did he ever share with you something that sounded like a real memory? Or was it just always anger, just vagueness? That is how liars sustain their lies. They tell you only enough to get you to think, not enough to make you believe. I thought about it and thought, she was right. Dad never gave us details beyond the one story about spoons and belts. And even that story had gaps. He'd never given us times, dates, situations. Only this imprecise dark shadow of, she's bad, she hurt me, I was sick. The letter went on and told me that she wasn't asking me to hate him, but for me to have the truth, since lies destroy families and she didn't want me to live the rest of my life hating a man who hadn't done anything to warrant it. She signed it, "With love, Grandma Margaret." I sat at that kitchen table for almost an hour just staring at the pages. My head was reeling, my gut in knots, as if my whole childhood had been remade before my eyes. Mom came in once and saw me clutching it, and the look on her face told me she had no clue what it was until I explained it to her. She froze, went pale, and breathed softly. Oh God, she found you. That was worse than the letter itself. Because if Mom didn't think it, she would have taken the letter from me and explained to me that it wasn't true. But she didn't. She just stood there with this guilty expression, as if she'd been caught doing something. I asked her point blank, "Is this true?" And she wouldn't speak. She sat down, massaged her forehead, and said, "You have to know, your father, he was complicated. He made some errors." That's not denial. That's not indignation. That's a confession. I was betrayed all over again, since it meant that Mom had at least known part of it, and cooperated with what Dad had been saying these past years. I stormed out of the house and got into my car, just clutching that letter, sobbing so hard that I couldn't see straight. It's simple to envision your father has imperfections, or is stern, or that he grew up hard. It's another thing entirely to think about the man you relied on might have founded your whole life on a lie. I wanted to rip up the letter, to disavow it, because if I accepted it I would have to reconstruct all memory that I had. But I couldn't. I had a feeling in my stomach that it was true, and once you've let it into your head, you can't push it back out. I didn't sleep that evening, but just waited in my old room looking at the ceiling, the letter folded tidily on the bedside table as if it were glowing, daring me to read it again. My brain kept running through all my memories of Dad, like a picture show I couldn't switch off, but now all the photographs had cracks in them. The man who slipped notes inside the napkin of my lunch, who yelled at soccer games, who ran off this creepy guy who followed me home one night. Was he the same man who could stand before his own mother and strip her of everything she'd battled for, and then trash her name on the floor to hide himself? By morning I was raw, my skin having been sandpapered, but I knew I could not leave it alone. I overtapped up with Dad in the garage, tinkering over his tools as always, radio playing softly in the background. For an instant, I almost turned back, because the sight of him in that everyday moment cut me again to the kid who wouldn't cross him. But I stood ahead of me, grasping the letter in a club-like grip. I informed him, "Dad, I had a letter from Grandma." His head jerked up, and the look on his face, fear then anger, was all the response I needed before he uttered a word. He bellowed, "She's lying. Whatever she said, it's a lie. You don't know her as good as I do." My hands trembled, but I held out. "She accuses you of stealing from her, of stealing her retirement." His face flushed and he growled, "That woman has poisoned people against me my whole life. Do you really think I would steal from my own mother?" And for a moment I nearly believed him again, because he spoke so sincerely, his voice thundering, his eyes frantic. But I remembered Mom's face last night, the way she couldn't deny it, and I said quietly, "She knew you'd say that." That stopped him in his tracks. He glared at me, his jaw clenching, and in the silence I knew he had no defense, no proof, no sense of moral outrage, but just hot air. I took a soft breath. "It's true, isn't it?" He said nothing. He just pounded his wrench on the workbench and stormed through the doorway into the house and screamed for Mom. I followed along, heart pounding, as the two of them started yelling at each other in the kitchen. "You swore this would never come out," he bellowed, and Mom bellowed back. "What did you think, you could keep it hidden forever? She has a right to know." I stood numb, watching my parents come apart before me, understanding Mom had been in on it the whole time. Dad finally turned to me, finger pointed like a dagger, and accused, "She's out to destroy me. If you believe her instead of me, then you're not my daughter anymore." That hurt more than anything, because he really did mean it. He'd rather separate us than admit what he'd done. I went to the house shaking, got in my car, and drove around like a fool for hours. I was in a truck stop diner, staring at a cold cup of coffee, trying to figure how the devil I was to even justify this. A part of me wanted to call Mark, blow it all wide open, but I did not know if he had been told. What if he had been told too and took Daddy's side? What if I was going to blow his world apart the way mine had just been blown apart? At last I sent him a text. "Got a letter from Grandma. We need to talk." He called immediately, his voice tight, as if he already knew. I told him everything, read out sections of the letter, and when I'd done, there was this enormous silence on the line. And then he added, "I always wondered." He told me that he had been hearing an argument many years ago, when he was maybe 15, when Dad was yelling at Mom about money and threatening, "She'll never get it back, she doesn't deserve it anyway." Mark had never told me about it because he had assumed he was hearing something else, or that he had misheard, but suddenly it all made sense. Hearing that made me both relieved and furious, because it meant the signs had been there all along, and we'd just chosen not to look too closely. Over the next few days, the house turned into a war zone. Dad wouldn't speak to me unless it was to yell. Mom tried to play peacekeeper, but her guilt hung on her like a second skin. I found her crying in the laundry room, repeating, "He's not all bad, you have to remember that," as if that was some sort of apology. But I couldn't see past it anymore. Every time I looked at Dad, I didn't see the man who'd raised me up, but the man who'd stolen from his own mother and then used deceptions as bullets to kill her. The hardest was realizing that for years, I'd carried his story as a badge, telling people that my grandmother was abusive, warning them away from her memory, when in reality she'd been the one who'd been victimized. I'd hated her for nothing. Shamefaced, guilty, I felt like I'd joined the smear campaign and didn't even know it. I started writing her back, firing off apologies, telling her that I wanted to hear her out. I didn't know if she'd respond or if she had the energy to even do so anymore, but it was all I could think of as a means to rectify the situation. Meanwhile, Dad went double or nothing. He told neighbors, family, friends, anyone who would hear, that Margaret was trying to kill him from beyond the grave, even though she was very much alive. He explained it like she was crazy, angry, and I was a gullible fool to think she was telling me the truth. The louder he yelled, the more frantically he clung to the lie, and the more certain I became of the truth. It broke something within me, though. I couldn't even look at him without feeling betrayed, and I couldn't look at Mom without seeing someone who'd chosen silence to truth. Our family dinners turned into cold, quiet meals, the tension so thick it was suffocating. I thought about going back to Boston early just to be out of it all, but something within me didn't want to leave, wanted to face it, to not be like Dad, a coward, because if I knew one thing at that point, it was that lies infect in the dark, and I wasn't going to let this one go on infecting. A week or so after I got that first letter, I opened up a letter in my Boston mailbox with the same trembly penmanship, and I guarantee you my fingers were trembling just opening it up. Grandma Margaret had responded. Her tone wasn't bitter or resentful as I half expected. Instead, it was tired, nearly depleted, but somehow dignified. She thanked me for responding, said she never thought she'd ever hear from you or Mark again, and that having any idea that you'd read her side of the story gave her some peace. She didn't waste paragraphs trying to convince me of her innocence. Instead, she spoke about memories, about how she'd made Dad's favorite peanut butter sandwiches for school, how much he'd loved fishing at the lake with his grandpa, how proud she'd been the day he'd graduated high school. She wasn't trying to present herself as a saint either. She admitted that she had been strict, that she worked all day and was not always patient, that she lost her temper sometimes. "But I never hit your father," she wrote, "and I never tried to break him down. I wanted him to be victorious, to be superior to me." It brought tears to my eyes when I read it because it was so ordinary, so human, not the demonic caricature Dad had built for all of us these years. I took Mark the letter, and we sat parked in his car one night outside a diner, passing it back and forth in stunned silence. He whispered quietly, "We wasted decades with her because of him." I didn't know what to say, because the size of the loss was so great. I started going visit her, little weekend trips to Ohio, sipping in her tiny little apartment full of tattered photographs and hand-drafted doilies. She was frail, her hands shaking, but her eyes emitted light when she saw me, as if she had waited all her life for this moment. We talked for hours. She told me about her childhood, how she had tended to Dad and Lisa by herself when my grandfather died, about working double shifts at the hospital to feed us. She did not criticize Dad. She did not have to. The truth was already heavy enough. What devastated me even more was when she said, "I never hated him for the money, Emily. I hated how he rejected me like trash." I recalled all the years that I had looked at the empty seat on Grandparents' Day, all the birthdays passed without a birthday card, all the white lies that put fences between us, and I realized how much is lost on my part as well. Not only her money, not only her dignity, my youth, my right to know my own people, my chance to love a grandmother. At home, things with Dad deteriorated fast. He would speak to me only to reprimand me as a traitor. Mom asked me to let it go for the sake of peace, but I could not unknow the truth. The final incident was Thanksgiving, when Dad pounded his fist on the table and roared that Margaret was dead to him and should be dead to me. I stood up, shaking, and replied, "She's more alive than you'll ever be, because at least she's honest." The room fell silent, everyone staring, and Dad's face puffed purple with anger. I left that night and have not come back since. Mark came on board a few months after I did, after his own blow-up with Dad, and now the two of us keep in regular contact with Grandma. She is not perfect, nobody's perfect, but she is real, and I'd have imperfect and real over slick dishonesty any time. The hardest thing is to get beyond the man that I thought Dad was and beyond the man who turned out to be. I still have those times when I catch myself remembering something nice. Him teaching me how to drive, him flipping burgers in the backyard, and for an instant, I feel warmth before bitterness comes flooding in, because all nice memories are now spoiled, layered with the realization that it all had been sitting atop this humongous lie. Everybody always says parents are supposed to protect you from the world, but I've come to find out sometimes they protect themselves, using you as a buffer. Dad built his freedom, his reputation, his comfort, on the destruction of his own mother's life, and he didn't even care that he took us kids along for the ride. What I carry with me now is the shame of having accepted him, of having recorded his story as fact for all those years. I reported teachers, classmates, even girlfriends that I was abused by my grandmother, and now I know that I was accusing a woman who had nothing left to lose. I can't get those years back, and that's what bothers me the most. The years lost, the relationships sullied, the truth suppressed by his vanity. But I'm building back up step by step, living with Grandma, hearing her stories, allowing her to tell me about the son she once loved. It stings, but it heals. It's putting away blanks I had no idea were even blank. And sometimes, when she hugs me goodnight, I catch myself imagining what my life would have been like if Dad hadn't lied, if I'd grown up on her laughter, her cooking, her always being there. I'll never have that childhood, but I can have this now, for however long. As for Dad, I don't know if we'll ever speak again. Maybe someday he will crack under the weight of his own deceit and admit the truth, but I wouldn't bet on it. He's built his whole identity as the victim, the survivor, the man who escaped an abusive mother, and to admit otherwise would be to shatter everything. I can see him dying holding on to the lie before he'd do it in the reality of what he'd done, and that is something I have no control over. What I can control is how I proceed. Refusing to bear his lies anymore, refusing to let his shame tell my story. Undefined for the first time, I think I'm seeing my family plainly, even if the truth is painful. Undefined, and sometimes clarity is its own form of peace, even if it hurts.